blame you at all. Okay, does anybody have any questions about what we did on Monday? Or we do some new stuff today? Actually, it's not all new. We're going to go back and reiterate a bunch of stuff that we talked about on Monday with a few more examples and then a bunch of pictures, and then we'll have some new stuff. Any questions? Anything we want to clarify? Okay, where did we quit? Birds. What? Yeah, so we were talking about mimicry in general as great examples of the power of natural selection. Okay, so these mimicry complexes and these characteristics that these organisms have, those things are all generated by this mechanism that we talked about, natural selection. So then we learned about some kinds of mimicry, like crypsis and then Batesian mimicry and Mullerian mimicry. Oh, where's one of you guys asked me about? Oh, you were asking me at the end of class. That was good. It was worth clarifying. You were asking me about Batesian mimicry and the mimic. The key thing about the Batesian mimicry complex is the mimic itself is actually good. Okay, that's the key to that one. The mimic, the thing that's mimicking something that has some protective capability, that is mimicking something bad, but the Batesian mimic is really okay. It's lying. Okay, so when we were talking about Mullerian mimicry, both the model and the mimic, they're both telling the truth. They may be both using aposematic coloration to warn potential predators, say, of their distastefulness, their unpalatability, but in Batesian mimicry, the mimic is lying. Okay, they're deriving benefit not from having some real protective capability, but in tricking the dupe into thinking there's something else, and in doing so they derive that benefit. Does that make sense? Okay. Then we talked about some other kinds of mimicry that have also names, but don't spend too much time worried about names like aggressive mimicry, things that mimic objects or mimic other organisms to be, say, better predators or even better parasites. So we've talked a little bit about immune systems and recognizing self and non-self when we were talking about HIV. Well, we have some parasites like some tapeworms. They'll be in your body, and your immune system is always going around and evaluating cells and evaluating things in the body and saying, oh, that's me, it's okay, that's me, it's okay, oh, that's not me, that needs to be attacked in some way. So if you have a big tapeworm, that should be something that your immune system would want to get rid of, right? Because it's a parasite, it's using your resources to your detriment. But some of these internal parasites actually mimic your cell surface molecules, your cell surface proteins and your cell surface sugars. And they put those on their bodies. And so when your immune system comes up to one of these even really large worms, these big parasites, your immune system says, that's me. Because the molecules it's using to recognize self from non-self, that organism has put those molecules, incorporated them, and they're outside, and so your immune system leaves it alone. Okay? Again, that's not a good thing with respect to the host, but that's a great thing with respect to the parasite. So we've been focusing on instances of mimicry where we see things with our eyes, or we see behaviors like, leaf mimicking things, swaying when they walk. But mimicry manifests itself in lots of different ways like that. That's really chemical mimicry, right? And when I was looking for my duck call again today, I still couldn't find it. That's mimicry, but through sound. Okay. Other things do interesting chemical mimicry. There's some spiders that are called bolus spiders, B-O-L-A-S, and they kind of hunt like the old gauchos of Argentina would hunt with these things called bolas. Did anybody know what those are? They would hunt rayas with them, these big ostrich-like birds. And they're usually 3 rocks that are tied together. They're kind of tied together like this. And you can swing them. You can swing them and throw them at something. You this would work on a person too. If somebody's running from you, and you had this and you threw it, and it hits their legs, what does it do? It goes around their legs and then, yeah, and you're done running. Okay, so they would use these to hunt birds. So there's a spider that kind of does this. Instead of a spider that builds a web and things get caught in the web, the bola spider doesn't make very much of a web, but it makes a little retreat, and then it spins a strand of silk with a big sticky ball on the end of it. And then it just hangs onto that with one of its legs, and when stuff gets close, it swings it out there and sticks to it and brings it back. And some of these bola spiders actually make chemicals that mimic the reproductive pheromones of some moths. So some moths, the females, when it's time for them to mate, after they've emerged and become adults, they'll go somewhere and they'll start releasing chemicals into the air, and the males smell those things with their antennae, and then they fly upstream to the source, and that's where the female is, and she finds them and mates. Well, that's the same thing. These spiders make the same or really similar enough chemicals. They don't have to be perfect, they just got to be good enough to make males of these moths what? Detect those molecules, fly upstream, hoping to find a female moth, but what do they find instead? The spider, yeah. So that, you can see how the spiders that make those chemicals, or even if just the slightest resemblance, they are going to get more moths, spending more time closer to them, and they're probably going to do better at gathering resources and, of course, living and reproducing and passing on the genes for doing that pretty cool behavior. Okay? Some other neat examples of mimicry that aren't through just visual appearance or chemicals are through light signals. Have anybody in here seen real fireflies before? We have them here in Los Angeles, but our fireflies are a group of beetles that make light. And our fireflies here in LA, they make light, but they don't fly and make light at the same time. So if you go on the east side of the Rockies, and you just go out in any field in the summertime, there are other kinds of fireflies that fly and make light, and they sit up in trees, and when the trees are full of them, they're like Christmas trees, but these are natural things. That's, to me, the fireflies flying, that's the closest thing to magic there is in the real world. So some of you have seen, where have you seen that before?
Mouse.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'm thinking Kansas or something. You guys are going farther away than that. Yeah, and in other parts of the world, not just fireflies, there are other kinds of beetles, and there are lots of organisms actually on Earth that can make light. So in the eastern United States, there are these fireflies are flying around and they're making light, and their lights are blinking on and off, okay? They actually turn the lights on and off kind of like by holding their breath, because it's a chemical reaction that takes place, and there's a molecule, or an enzyme called luciferase, and it needs ATP to operate. And when these insects breathe through a series of tubes in their sides. Humans and other vertebrates, we get oxygen to our cells in a completely different way. Insects have holes that you could, if you were really small, you could walk in them. They would be like walking around, and you ever go in the storm drain system under LA and go like in the LA River and just start going down the tubes, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's just like that. You get to the cellular level. So these fireflies, they close their spiracles, the little the gates at the end of their tracheal system. They close their spiracles, then that shuts off O2, which they don't make any more ATP, and so the lights go out. So by breathing or not breathing, they can turn their lights on and off real fast. So why do these fireflies make that light? Yeah, who are they signaling to? Yeah, so what might they be saying?
They're ready to mate.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. And so they're communicating back and forth. A lot of times what the females will sit up in the trees and the males will be flying around and they'll be blinking back and forth. So you can picture the females sitting up there and they're blinking signals to the males flying around the field. And what are they saying? Yeah, I'm ready to mate. I'm home all alone. The back door's open. You know, come on over, guys. And so that's what she's saying. And then they're blinking back and they're saying, oh, great. Nice to see that you're available. I'll be right there. And they fly over, and then they find the female, and then they mate, okay? and then she lays eggs and reproduces and go on to the next generation. Well, there are some fireflies in the east in the genus Photinus, and they're kind of neat because they produce some really nasty chemicals. And actually, when you think of it, some of these fireflies are kind of aposematically colored. They're really not trying to hide that much, although they're mostly out at night. And these Photinus, they can produce these nasty chemicals, which not only makes them bad to eat, but when they lay eggs, they put these chemicals on the eggs, and it protects them from predation. Okay? Then there's another genus that lives in the same place, and it's called Photurus. Lots of fireflies have this word in their name. Why? What does that mean? Light. Yeah, so it's part of their name. These Photurus, they do the same thing, except they can't make these nasty chemicals to put on their eggs and protect their young. But they have a way of getting those chemicals. And what they do is Photurus females will sit there on leaves and they will blink out the right kind of signal to attract Photurus males that come in and they mate. But they can also mimic the signals of Photinus females. So it's really a Photurus female, and she's blinking out, hey, Photinus males, I'm here, I'm available, all this nice fancy talk and stuff like that. And then Photinus males signal back, oh, that's great that you're available, I'll be right there. And they go flying up there to the signal, and they land on the leaf, and it's not a Photinus female, it's a Photurus female, and she catches him, and she kills him, and she eats him. And now she takes his chemicals, those nasty chemicals, and now she can use them for her eggs. Okay, so the mimicry that's going on is in the light signals. They're mimicking the language of an unrelated species of firefly to their benefit. Okay? Sometimes mimicry actually takes place within a species. So there are some mammals and there are some insects that when they mate, in the seminal fluid of the male are molecules that mimic female hormone molecules. And what they make the female do is produce more eggs, lay those eggs fairly quickly, and don't mate with anybody else. Okay? You can see how that would get perpetuated, right? Because males that do that end up fertilizing more eggs, they get laid quicker, and they end up in females that tend not to mate with other males, and so those other males might be ones that would fertilize their eggs instead of him. And so that's a chemical mimicry example, but that's within a species. So we'll see this later on in the semester too. There are other things, males and females. There's kind of, sometimes there's a conflict of interest in what makes a successful male versus a successful female. And sometimes those conflicts of interest can be tipped either way through mimicry like that. Okay? Again, these are just multiple examples, again, all generated by natural selection. And if you think about them, you can kind of see how they would come about. I think we're okay for that. Let's look at some pictures to reiterate the different kinds of mimicry that we talked about and look at some good examples. Okay. What's that?
Grasshopper?
Yeah, it's a grasshopper. This is one of our local species of grasshopper. This is Trimeratropus polytopetus. This is one of the most wide-ranging insects that I could think of. They go from way up in Canada all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, the southern end of South America. These are right here on campus, and they look like when they're sitting on, we just go out to the parking lot and asphalt. Some of them are they go land there, and some other species in the same genus will land on the parking lot. They're super easy to see. But when they're on their natural backgrounds, like gravelly soil, they're very difficult to see. Even when you see it, if you're trying to catch it with a net, you'll see them take off and then they land again. And you really got to pay attention where they land because they'll just sit there and they'll sit still. What's this kind of mimicry called? Crypsis. Yeah, you could use the word camouflage or crypsis, but this thing is very cryptic against its inanimate background, these little bits of rock. These things are edible, you can eat lots of them, they're not nasty, they're not distasteful or unpalatable, and they derive protection from visually oriented predators by blending in with their background. Okay, here's another one that lives in a different place. This is actually a larva or a nymph of a grasshopper, and instead of being on gravel, the habitat this lives in is a bunch of big basaltic boulders. There's some lichens and stuff on there, but this is really dark colored rock, and this grasshopper here is very dark colored and hard to see. Another thing to keep in mind, particularly with these insects, you can't take this grasshopper and put it over on gravel and then wait a while and it'll look like gravel. This is the way they are. So if you moved them from one place to the next, now they would really stick out. Okay, they don't change and become something else. There are organisms that can change their appearance within an individual's lifetime and actually within most. Every generation, you think of that species as dumping out a bunch of variants, and those variants in their color patterns are based upon variants in their genes, and based on that environment at that time, some are going to do better than others at surviving long enough to reproduce, and they pass on those genes for things. So in a dark colored environment, those grasshoppers there are going to get selected for dark colored grasshoppers. Anybody know what this is? It's a turtle. Yeah, this is just its head though. Okay, this is a turtle that lives in Amazonia. It's called a mata-mata. And its shell is brown and has points on it, and its head is all kind of pointy, and its legs are all kind of pointy, and it lives in shallow waters, and in that place there's lots of trees, and so there's lots of leaves which end up in the water, which end up starting to decompose and turning brown. So this thing lives in the water among brown leaves, and a pile of leaves is what? A whole mishmash of shadows and points. And so these things look like it. It has kind of a long nose. It's kind of out of focus here, but there's two little holes there, so it can put its head up really slowly to the surface, breathe for a little bit, go back down. So part of this might be to avoid things that might harm them, but this is also a good example of being a good predator. So things like fish that wouldn't normally swim up to a turtle will swim up and go right past the thing because it just looks like leaves and sticks. And then these things are like lightning, and they dart out their head really fast and open their mouth and suck in water and grab a hold of some unsuspecting prey. But this is also a good example of crypsis. So on the land, there are also piles of leaves. This is really a toad. It's in the same genus as the toads that we have around here. But again, this is a good forest floor leafy substrate mimic. It's very pointy and bumpy, and it has combinations of brown and black, because not all the leaves are flat. You know, some of them are curled up and they have shadows on them. So lots of things that live on the forest floor among leaves have these color patterns. Crypsis. Things that live on green leaves, though, they're green. And so here's a frog. This is primarily a nocturnal animal. Then during the day, this thing just goes and sits on vegetation, and it just sits there all day and waits for night. And its means of avoiding predation is just to not be seen in the first place. It really can't fight back much. It doesn't have any really nasty chemicals. It just sits there and hopes not to be seen. Okay? And here's a praying mantid. Its head is down here, and there's its body, and there's its hind legs, its middle legs, and its front legs are kind of tucked up under its head here. And this is on the trunk of a tree that's all covered with, kind of scaly, shedding bark, mosses and lichens. And this brown thing here is actually a termite trail. They build little kind of semicircular coverings, and they go back and forth in there, so they're not out exposed. And so on tree trunks like this, there are all hosts of even reptiles and amphibians and insects that are on the sides of trees, and it's very broken up background, and so their body is very broken up. It's not just one color, so they're very very cryptic. And this again would be trying to avoid predation. Again, you can eat these things. They're not unpalatable at all. And then things that live on plants that don't have lots of leaves, things like walking sticks. So here's actually a pair of walking sticks that are mating. Here's the male right here, and here's the female. And so these live on shrubs. They live right here in Southern California, this species does. And they're very hard to see. If you know they're in the shrub and you look really hard, and just keep watching for movement. When they move, then your brain picks it up, and then you make a picture in your brain, and you can see where they are. Or if they end up walking on the side of a building, then they really stand out. They're decent-sized insects too. Their body's about, 3 inches long. But the longest insects in the world are walking sticks, and some of them are that long. Close to like 30 inches long. But they're really skinny. They're not that big. They just have long limbs and long bodies. This is pretty cool. Anybody know what kind of organism this is?
Seahorse.
Yeah, it's a fish that we call a seahorse because its head kind of has the shape of a horse. Where does this live? It lives in the ocean, yeah, but it lives among kelp, brown algae. This is all its body. This isn't kelp growing on it. This is all the body of this organism. And it stands out real well in this black background. But just like there are lots of things that live on the sides of trees, lots of things live in and among kelp. And this is an amazing example of crypsis. There are some other fish that each fish just looks like one blade of that big brown kelp. And they sit there with their heads down, kind of like they're attached to the stalks of the kelp. And they're very difficult to see. That's pretty amazing right there. And then here, I said I like katydids, so we got lots of katydid pictures. Here's a katydid sitting on a limb. Its head is right here. Its front legs are right here. It's kind of gripping it, and then the hind legs are down here, nice and straight. And so these are almost all these katydids are nocturnal organisms. So just like that green forest frog, during the day they're just sitting on the vegetation or the tree trunks or branches like this. They're just waiting for night. Then they come out and they fly around and they climb around the vegetation, look for mates, feed, and do all the things that katydids do at night. But during the day, they're really depending upon crypsis for their survival. And then, as I mentioned the other day, lots of katydids mimic leaves. So, as is true of most insects that have wings, they have 4 wings, 2 pairs. The front pairs in katydids that have big, well-developed wings, it's the front pair that do the mimicking of the leaves. The hind pair is more folded up like a fan, and that's what they use to fly with. So they'll pick up these front wings like this, and then the hind wings will come out, and that's what flaps up and down. But these 4 wings really look like leaves, even to the point that they have a central axis here, and they have what looks like the veins in leaves. And all leaves aren't perfect, and so these katydids also have blemishes. These aren't mold spots on the katydid's wings. These are marks on the wings that look like mold spots and chew marks and things like that that you find on real leaves. And again, you live among leaves and you behave like leaves. They're very hard to detect. So here's another one. This one's even more leaf-like here with lots of different blotches and incongruities in its body that makes it look like a real leaf. And then here's ones that are all kind of torn out. Remember I talked about some within a single species have different color morphs? So within this particular, I think these are called typophyllum. Typo meaning you are something or you appear to be something. A phylum is a leaf, P-H-Y-L, phylum. And so this literally means they look like a leaf. But some of them are green and some of them are brown. And these are adults, so they have their full wings. You can see the shape of the wing is the same, they're just different colors. But these are great mimics of leaves. And katydids that live on spiny bushes are much more skinny and spindly and thorny. They have like lots of spines here on the tibia and the femurs of their legs, and look more like the vegetation than ones that live on plants with really big leaves. This is a little caterpillar. So this is I forgot what kind of plant this was, but here's a petiole of a leaf, and then this is a caterpillar of a geometric moth, an inchworm, and here's its body, there's its head, its real legs are here, and then with its pseudopods it's hanging on here, and so all day long it just goes like this, and just says, I'm just a petiole of a plant, nothing here to see, move along. And they spend all day like this, and then the next time, when it's at night, then they go crawling around. They don't have to worry as much about visually oriented predators then, and that's when they feed and do their thing. So they just sit there like that, and cool things. See, what's this? This is actually, I mean, sometimes you come across spit and stuff from people. This is an insect makes this. It's a group of insects that are called spittle bugs. And they're in a group of insects. Remember we talked about those, oh, remember the soapberry bug that had the long, drawn-out straw-like mouth parts? These are in the same order of insects, and so these stick their mouth parts into plants, and they got unlimited water and unlimited sugars. And what they do is they pull fluids out of the plants, and then they froth it up. The larvae live inside this spit. It's kind of, nothing's going to go eating that. That's kind of disgusting, and they live in there, and they're protected. Not only by looking like something that's kind of disgusting, but what's that talking? I can still see. But it's also even a mechanical device, because little parasitoid wasps, they can't get through this too. But it mimics something disgusting, and it renders them unpalatable. These are very common things around here. Sometimes you can walk through fields in the spring, and if all the plants are covered with them, if you wear long pants, I don't know why anybody would wear long pants, but you wear long pants and you walk through these, you just get your pants get all wet from this, because it's very common and very prominent. Then when these things become adults, they leave that, and they have wings, and they fly around, and they don't deal with that spittle stuff anymore. Yes? Well, I don't know. No, I would say this might be more crypsis. Again, we've learned a few kinds of mimicry, and now we're looking at real cases, and a lot of times it's hard to fit those into those categories. Remember, we like to put them in categories, but sometimes they don't fit very well. So, but I wouldn't call this Mullerian mimicry, I wouldn't call it Bayesian mimicry. If anything, I would call it crypsis, and that they're kind of mimicking something that is an inanimate thing, but it's not so much to not be seen, but it's to look like something else, but it's an inanimate thing. That doesn't really answer your question, but there may be some fancy words for this term. There's probably dozens and dozens of kinds of mimicry that have terms. We're just talking about a few of them with respect to the names, but lots of these examples don't fit in those categories. Is that okay? Oh, here's another one. I have, this is from a rosemary bush in my yard, and every spring and summer, this just gets filled with these things. But here you can see an adult right here. This one has one. I didn't think of it before, but this guy's actually doing some mimicry himself. He looks like he has a big fake eye spot here, and his real head is up there, but this actually looks more like the head down here. But once they do that, they fly around and don't go back in that stuff. Okay, what's this? It's a moth, and what is it mimicking? A what? Yeah, it's mimicking like a bird dropping. Okay, so if you, and this is what bird droppings look like, right? They have dark spots, and they have really white spots. You ever seen like some bird shit on a leaf? What is the white stuff in that bird shit? No, that's bird shit too. So, if you're going to mimic a bird dropping, do you sit underneath leaves? No, these are sitting right on tops of leaves, right out there for everything to see them. But nobody's going to eat that. There are lots of, but this is an adult moth, but there are lots of caterpillars and things. They just look like turds. And they just sit there, and nobody's going to bother them. So that's again, like you were asking, kind of cryptic, you're looking like something else, but you're looking like something that's kind of disgusting and wouldn't be considered food for things. And then this is like what I was talking about the other day. This is a boa constrictor. Oh, this is an example of forest floor leaves. See, it's all shadowy, different colors of brown and black. And then here's the head of this boa constrictor, and then it just goes on. And so this is, yeah, it might keep big things from finding it, but not much eats these things. But it makes them a lot better predators to small and pretty large mammals that would never go up to a snake. But if they don't know that there's a snake there, they'll walk right up to it. And then if it's within striking distance, these will just grab a hold of them. And these are constrictors. They just pull them in and they just wad them up and squeeze tight till you can't breathe anymore. And then they're dead, and then you eat them. What's this guy doing? This is like our duck hunters. But this guy here, he's got a bow and an arrow, and he's got this fake bird. He's probably going to go out there to a marsh or something like that and stay low and mimic some bird that the things he's hunting wouldn't pay any mind to. There's tall birds walking around, and he can get close. Okay, so if we put this into a category, this would be like a duck hunter. This would be aggressive mimicry. Mimicking something else to fool the dupe, which is actually the thing that you're preying upon, into not paying much attention to you or allowing you to get closer and be a better predator. Okay, here's some other non-visual examples of mimicry. This is a scarab family of beetles, the Scarabaeidae, which is huge. And this is a beetle in the genus Chromastichylis. And these are harvester ants. Both of these things live around here. And what these beetles do is they're young, and even the adults, they live inside of ant nests. We'll talk about this later. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff later. I should say that every day. They live inside of ant nests. Well, if you can, inside of bee colonies, wasp colonies, ant nests, there's all kinds of good stuff in there. There's lots of organisms to eat. There's all the food that they gather. It's all in one place, in one protected place. Okay, but those ants, they don't want you in there. Bees don't want you in their colony. But the selective pressure to get in there and get to those resources is so great that lots of things have, if we want to use the natural selection term of figured it out, they have lots of ways of mimicking ants or bees or wasps, or mimicking things that the ants or bees or wasps don't care about, and it allows them to live in there with all of these resources. It's a great thing. So what this beetle does is it lives inside of ant nests, but this is how it gets there. When they're adults and they fly around, they land on the ground, and then at the bases of their elytra, the front pair of wings in beetles, they have these little patches that look like they're kind of velvety hairs on it. And they produce these chemicals that mimic chemicals that the ants produce that says, I must have this. Okay, they don't evaluate it as being something dangerous. Ants live in a world of chemicals, and the chemical says, you must have this, take it home. And that's all they think about. They get it, they work in groups, we've got to have this, we have to bring it home, we have to put it in our colony. And they do that, and again, they ought not to be doing that. But they're being fooled by this beetle to do what the beetle wants. And then these ants take this down into the colony. These things nest in the ground. And now it's where it wants to be. It can lay its eggs in there, and it can reproduce and take advantage of all the stuff that those ants have to offer. Even eating ant eggs or ant larvae, which would be a horrible thing from the ant's perspective, but from the beetle's perspective, it's a great, great thing. But that's an example of aggressive mimicry, I guess, via chemicals. This is also kind of aggressive mimicry. Anybody got any ideas what this is?
Plant oysters.
It's actually a freshwater bivalve, a clam. It's in the genus Lampsilus. What's that?
It's tongue.
No, it's actually the edge of the mantle. So it's fairly muscular and fleshy. When you eat clams, that's a lot of the good part is the mantle. It's also the part that secretes the shell. So at one time the shell was, say, this big, and they're constantly secreting, in this case is calcium carbonate stuff, they're constantly secreting it at the edge of the mantle, and the shell gets bigger. Well, the edge of this clam's mantle is this thing that looks like, it actually moves and behaves like a what? A fish. There's no one in here that could disagree that that doesn't look like a fish. So what's going on here? Well, it has to do with the life history, the reproduction strategy of these clams. They make eggs, they're fertilized here, let's say this is a female, and then the eggs hatch and they produce larval clams that really don't look so much like clams. Lots of gastropods and bivalves, their larvae look very different, and they're planktonic, they live out in the ocean before they settle out and become things that look like clams or snails. And these freshwater ones, the larvae are just kind of two teeth that are hinged. They're called Glaucidia larvae. And what these things do is they're parasitic. They get onto the gills of fish, and they grip on, and they feed on the blood, the fluids there on the fish gills. Fish gills are super red, they're full of blood, very nutritious things if you can get to them. So these clams could produce lots of Glaucidia and let them go into the environment. But what's the chance of any one of those making it onto the gills of a fish? Pretty small. So lots of organisms, that's the case, and they counteract those chances of any one of them by producing tons. So you ever see a pine tree when it's producing pollen, there are literally trillions of pollen grains being blown, yet clouds of yellow blow off of pine trees. If you bet on any one of those pollen grains finding its way to a female cone of the same species and fertilizing it, making a seed, and that seed turning into a tree, don't bet. You're going to lose every time, or almost every time. So they produce so many, that's how they hedge their bets. It's like going to Las Vegas and you bet on everything. But it's expensive, but you will win something somewhere. And if that's all you have to do is win once, one way is to bet a lot, okay? This hedges its bets. So what they do is the mantle is there, and they retain those Glaucidia larvae inside the shells, and they wave that mantle like this, and other real fish go over to check it out. It's like, oh, this is interesting. Again, maybe it even looks like somebody from my own species. And they go and investigate it and get close, and then the clam can shoot a bunch of these larvae out. Now the chances of any one of what? They've gone way up. Okay, so that's like an aggressive mimicry example, because they're doing something at the expense of that fish that they're going to parasitize. And so there are lots of examples of these fish-like mantles within this genus Lampsalis. They're fantastic examples of natural selection in action. And this insect here is about the same size, and it has a bump on its head with a dark spot, and it has a line here, the trees, and things that eat insects don't bother with lizards. But this insect here looks like a lizard. So look back at this lizard here, and you can see and avoid predation. Its real eyes are right here, and this is also in that same order with those things with a long straw-like mouth part. So it has a straw-like mouth part down here. All this thing is a big hollow evagination, a crown, or like almost a hat. It's part of its head, but it's the top of its head, and it doesn't do anything except make it look like a lizard. And they sit on the same trees, same place, at the same time. They also have other tricks. If you bother them, they do this. And there are lots of insects that can open their hind wings at the same time, and they flash these big eye spots. What does that do? Yeah, you could picture a bird, or in this place a little monkey or something's finding that and touching it to see what it is, and they open their wings, and lots of vertebrates. 2 eyes is very frightening, especially going from nothing to 2 eyes at once. And all that has to do is buy you how much time? Even a fraction of a second, and that's just a little bit of an advantage you have over being preyed upon. These things actually are very fast flyers, and they're very wary. They're hard to catch for lots of reasons. One of them being for predators, they flash eye spots and they're gone. Lots of insects have red hind wings. It's the same thing. They're cryptic, until you actually discover that, oh, that cryptic thing is really something to be investigated. Then they open their wings and flash red hind wings at you. It's just a fraction of a second of startling, and before they're gone, okay? Fast flyers, and they're gone. This is another group of butterflies called owl butterflies, and they have the same thing, except contrary to lots of textbooks, you never see both eyes at once, because they sit like this. This is the underside of their wings, and they have big eyes here, and they kind of look like some vertebrate sitting on a trunk or a branch of a tree. But again, a different use of big eye spots. This is kind of neat. These are this, and this, and this, and this are beetles, and they're in a family of beetles called the Curculionidae. They're weevils, and they tend to have really drawn-out heads, and their mouths are at the end of that. And there's lots of these weevils that mimic flies like this sarcophagid fly. Why, if a beetle, and this is a beetle that you can eat, there's nothing distasteful about it. There's also nothing really distasteful about this until somebody tells you where it grew up. But that really you could eat these things. Why would this mimic that? What protective benefit do these get from mimicking those? Any guesses? What do you know about some flies that are like that? Are they easy to catch? No. So bees actually are pretty easy to catch. But if you look like something that's really hard to catch, why bother? Every time I go after those flies, I never get them, so I'm going to quit going after them. And so if you look like this, you're going to fool things that, let's quit going after hard to catch things. It looks like something that's hard to catch. Okay? And this, I just got this one the other day. This is a bug, again in that order with the long straw-like mouth parts, except its head is over here. This is really its wings. It has a big eye spot here, and it has a long, these are just parts of its wings. And then it has two things that mimic antennae and mimic the long rostrum and an eye of a weevil. I'm not sure what this gets by mimicking a weevil, unless some weevils are hard to catch, or maybe it's mimicking a weevil that mimics flies that are hard to catch. So this is pretty cool. Again, this is its real head. This is just all extraneous stuff that's on the ends of its wings. What's the kind of coloration that we call this? Yeah, this is a good example of aposematic coloration. Are these trying to hide? No, they want to be seen. They're saying, look at me, leave me alone, I'm nasty. These are telling the truth. This is in a family of beetles called the Erytilidae. These would just taste awful, okay? So if you like to eat bugs, just to be safe, don't eat stuff that's red and black, or orange and black, or yellow and black. You know, sometimes you might miss out on something that was okay to eat, but oftentimes it's something that's awful, and so just don't. Or you
I was gonna ask you, are ladybugs bad?
awful.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the ladybugs that are red and black, they want to be seen and they're telling the truth. Again, if you don't believe me, you're not going to die, eat one. This one, they're awful. Yeah. Really, this really strong, we spit it out. Oh, and then when you back here asked about these frogs, yeah, so you mentioned tree frogs. Tree frogs are in the family Hylidae. This is a family called Dendrobatidae. And most of the hylids, they're actually very cryptic. They don't want to be seen, like that green frog that we saw. These frogs, though, they want to be seen. They're very aposematically colored, and we talked about them having very powerful neurotoxins in their skin. So you don't want to make a mistake and eat these kinds of frogs. They don't want you to make a mistake, so they're telling you, they're advertising, and they're telling the truth. Yeah.
Question. So, like, for the poison dart bugs, though, like, how would, like, the vertebrates learn not to eat those?
Well,
again
some
next
of them
time?
make mistakes and die,
Right.
and that doesn't do very much. But the ones that don't die, if they're, the big thing that we're dealing with here, when I talk about visually oriented predators, some of them are mammals, some of the primates, but the big thing is birds. And there have been birds around for something like 150, 200 million years. Okay, plenty of time to mold these things into anti-bird situations. And so some of them will eat or even just experience it. Don't eat it, just get it in your mouth or something. And they get violently ill. People have done pretty neat experiments with blue jays, the real blue jays in the east, eating monarchs, and they just throw up, just bleh, you know. And they don't fool with those things. They don't fool with them anymore. And they don't fool with things that kind of look like them. They're smart, but they're not that smart to remember the peculiarities between different species of butterflies, and so they just avoid those yellow and black things altogether. But you're right, there is learning involved, and that's one of the reasons why you can't have just a few models and lots of Batesian mimics that are lying, because the rate of learning from these predators is going to be too low. They're just going to keep making mistakes, and the situation works when there's lots of models and fewer of the mimics. This is also a postsomatic coloration, but this insect is probably more active when? At night, yeah. So we said a postsomatic coloration at night are things that are black and white. You can see the contrast. You can see that at night. You can't see red and yellow. There's no light. There's nothing to reflect. There's none of those wavelengths present to reflect off and make those colors. So this thing is kind of more active at night. Actually, in the daytime, they run around on the ground and they mimic the seeds of things like cottonwood trees. They're little bits of fluff. And instead of walking in a straight line, they just go all over the place, like they're being blown around by the wind. And at night, though, they look like they're postsomatically colored, and these are telling the truth. They're called velvet ants, but they're not ants. They're actually wasps, and the females don't have any wings, but like lots of wasps, they sting. And they have really powerful stings. So you get stung by these things, you don't leave them, you leave them alone. They call it velvet ants. This isn't very velvety, but lots of them are postsomatic during the daytime, and they have black bodies with really red or orange hairs on them. And they're very dense and short. They look very velvety. Okay, so that's Crypsis and a bunch of other things, and now we'll look at a little bit, reiterate on Batesian mimicry. This is what Henry Walter Bates looked like, the person that discovered this phenomenon. What's he missing? Yeah, I thought he had a beard. He's kind of got those lame big ciphers, so it's like halfway important here. And then here's those two butterflies that we talked about. This is the monarch up here, and this is the viceroy. You spend a little bit of time, you can tell these things apart without too much trouble, but you can see that they're so similar that if you learn to leave these things alone, you'll also leave these things alone. Again, these are actually really common on our campus. You go over to the botanic garden. Remember those? What kind of plants do they eat? Milkweed, yeah. So they grow that in the garden, and there's lots of them that reproduce over there. They're very common butterflies. Here's another cool example of Batesian mimicry. So this is a wasp, and it can sting. And just pay attention to its color patterns. So it has kind of an abdomen that's red, and the thorax is black and white, and the wings are kind of smoky and real dark, and then it has antennae that are black, then white, then black. Here's a katydid. This, if you ate it, stings you in the mouth. This, if you eat it, it's okay. But look at it. It's the same thing. These live in the same place. These live in the same place at the same time. It has the red abdomen, the black and white thorax, and it even has the antennae that are black, then white, then black. It's pretending to be, but lying. It's pretending to be something that stings. Yeah.
Do those things, like, are they just originally like that, or do they just gradually start to look like that?
Yeah, they gradually start. So if you went to the common ancestor, say, of all, when we start drawing more phylogenies, when I talk about common ancestors will make sense. But if we draw a phylogeny of all the katydids in the world, it's a family called the Tetagoniidae. And if we went back to the common ancestor, this lineage that gave rise to be the base of the tree, those things would not look like this, okay? But multiple lineages have picked up on things like this, and some of these different lineages have got this way independently, but in a similar fashion. So what you want to picture is an ancestor way back when that didn't look like this, but in the presence, in a place that has these katydids in a particular lineage that look, again, every generation is producing variants. Any of them that tend to, even the slightest degree, derive protection by looking like this, those genes are going to, on average, end up in individuals that do better at living, surviving, and reproducing, and hence passing on those kinds of genes and alleles that code for that. But then the next generation, you're dumping out new variants. Some of those even look even the slightest bit more like that, and less than something else, and those get perpetuated. Again, it all has to be is like 50.00001, and in time, those will get perpetuated at the expense of other things. And if you look at it, it doesn't happen overnight, but if you look at that long lineage over time, it develops into something that looks like this. Another thing to keep in mind is it done? Is this lineage done evolving? No, don't. We tend to think of today, again, one of our biases, we tend to think of these lineages as going somewhere and needing to end up here. These things don't need to do anything. Okay, it is that way, and it is that way today. What do you suppose if that other thing disappeared? Now, there are lots of other wasps that look like that, but let's say there's only one species of those wasps with this color pattern. What if it disappeared? What might be the fate of this lineage here? Well, any variants that don't look like this are going to be just as successful as variants that do, because there's no selective pressure favoring not eating ones that look like wasps versus ones that do look like wasps. And it's very likely that this thing would lose this color pattern and it would look something else. And maybe it would pick up on crypsis and become something that's very cryptic, like lots of other katydids. So we often think that evolution is going towards something, and we're here today and we've made it, and this is the way things are. But no, it just keeps going on. Does that help with your question? So yeah, and it's not like something that would have happened overnight, but variants every generation over a long time that have some advantage, differential reproductive advantage, by looking and behaving like something that they're not, that gets perpetuated and it gets accentuated over time. And a lot of our examples are examples of accentuation of those kinds of things to great degrees. This is another great Batesian model. In South America, particularly northern South America, this is about as big as ants get. This ant is about 1.25 inches long. It's called Dinoponera quadriceps. A close relative of it is Paraponera clavata, and people think of that as the most powerful stinging insect in the world. So this is pretty close to that. But this looks just a big black ant, and think of what ants look like. A big head, they have geniculate or elbowed antennae, and then it kind of narrows, and then you have what you think is the thorax, but it's really not. Then it gets really narrow, and then sometimes they have a node here, and it's narrow again, and then you have the gaster. So because these things are powerful stingers, lots of things leave them alone. They leave alone things that look like and behave like ants. Also, behaving like an ant, you can't just walk around like this. How do ants walk around? They're just all hyped up, like they drink those Red Bull things that you guys drink. Those are heart attacks in a can, by the way. And they just moving around. They're all skittish and nervous and stuff like that. So things that mimic ants, they do the same thing. They're always moving around fast. So this is a great model, and lots of things independently have picked up on this and are great Batesian mimics. So this is a praying mantis. And it has long antennae, but one way to make it look like it has short antennae is with these white marks, and these antennae, they move around, and then it doesn't have a narrow waist, but it just has an hourglass white mark here that makes it look like it has a narrow waist, and it's very ant-like. But this thing is Batesian mimicry. That thing is really harmless, but it derives protection by looking like that ant. And here's a longhorn beetle that lives in the same place, and it has elbowed antennae, and here it's making a narrow waist the same way. It's morphologically not narrow, it just has light coloration here that squint your eyes a little bit. It really looks like this is the narrow waist of an ant. What's this? Ah, it's not a snake. It's actually a caterpillar. How many of you ever grow tomatoes? Anybody here grow tomatoes? And then sometimes you get, there's a caterpillar called a tomato hornworm around here. They're big. They're like kind of moderate-sized green cigars. And when they get real big, and they live on the plants, and then when they become mature, they go down and burrow in the soil and pupate, and they turn into a moth. This is a caterpillar in the same family as the Spingidae as those tomato hornworms. And if you look really close, its head is here, and it has 1 pair, 2 pair, 3 pair of legs. It's a caterpillar. Instead of hanging onto the plants like this, it's let go, leaned back, and turned its head toward you, and swelled up its thorax, the thoracic, not just the thoracic segments, but the first abdominal segments. It swelled them up, and it has these big eye marks on it, and again, these big reptilian-like scales. And it moves like this. It sways back and forth. So if you see one of these, it looks like a big hornworm on a plant, and you touch it or bother it, it lets go with its real legs and becomes this really fast. Okay? Again, you could eat this, but it's a real obvious protection. The next picture, you can see the whole thing, and you can see how it's working. This is not the same species. Again, if you look carefully, it's different, but it's a closely related species. But now you can see how it's hanging on with its pseudopods, letting go, inflating in front of its body, and it's upside down. Here's where its legs are, and its head is right here. Again, really looks like and behaves like a snake. And you're going to leave that alone when it starts doing that, if that's not what you expected to encounter. And then this is what the adult looks like. So, this is another great Batesian mimicry model. Yeah, this is a tarantula hawk. There's a family of wasps here and pretty much all over the world called the Pompilidae. And most of them are little small wasps. And what these do is they go out and they hunt spiders. They get them, they sting them, and then they bury them in the ground, and they provision the next generation with paralyzed spiders, and they lay eggs on them. Well, lots of these little ones go and hunt little spiders, but there are big tarantula hawks, this big, that go hunt big spiders, like the biggest spiders in the world, tarantulas. And they find them, and the females battle with that tarantula, and if she can, she stings it. It doesn't kill it. It's paralyzed, it can't move, and she drags it away, buries it under the ground, and lays an egg on it, and then that egg hatches into a little maggot-like larva that eats that spider alive. It's fresh food, you know, it's not like a dead spider that's going to rot in a few days. It's fresh food, and it stays alive for a long time. As you might imagine, these things have powerful stings. In fact, I talked about that one ant having the most powerful stings, but people rate these spider wasps, these big tarantula hawks, as having the second most powerful stings. So look what typical ones look like. Kind of a black, mat-like body, sometimes with metallic blue-green sheens on it, and then these very opaque, dark brick red wings and typical wasp antennae. Because this is has such great protective ability, there are lots of things that mimic tarantula hawks. So this one's a bug, a true bug. Here's its straw-like mouthparts. This one is in a group that doesn't stick its mouthparts into plants, but they stick them into other insects, and they feed on their fluids. And so this is a great Pepsis wasp, tarantula hawk mimic. Same body color, same wings, and some of those tarantula hawks have orange antennae. You're not going to fool with these if you know anything about tarantula hawks. Although as humans, if you study this, you would see it's not a wasp at all, it's something else. But in general enough appearance, it's good enough to derive protection from looking like a tarantula hawk. This is a beetle, a longhorn beetle, the family Cerambycidae. and it kind of looks like a tarantula hawk here on this yucca stalk, but when they fly, they really look like tarantula hawks. This thing, the larvae are wood-boring, but they live inside of Hespera yucca whipplei that lives around here. Particularly if you drive in the springtime through Big Tujunga Wash, there's all these plants that are very spiky, a rosette of leaves, and then they send up a big flowering stalk that would be above the ceiling in here with big white, creamy white flowers on their yuccas. So these things live inside of those as larvae, but the adults really look like tarantula hawks, particularly when they're flying. But again, these are harmless. Here's a fly, a mydid fly, that mimics tarantula hawks. Again, it's a fly, it doesn't sting, it doesn't bite, and yet this is a great mimic of tarantula hawks. There's another fly, another family, the Acylidae, which are robber flies. Again, harmless, but these are big flies. These are some of the biggest flies in North America. They're huge. They're just like these tarantula hawks. And here's a moth. Again, moths are good to eat. And great, this one's the orange antennae tarantula hawk mimic. And then what's this? Remember I told you I like katydids. This is a katydid. So all of these different lineages of insects, there are species that have picked up on the same thing, and they got that way independent of each other, and all look like tarantula hawks. And this is what? Yeah, it's a real, this one's actually a queen of one of our local yellow jackets or hornets. Very aposematically colored. Is it lying or telling the truth? Telling the truth, these things sting. And again, this is from right here in Southern California. And then we have flies that are completely harmless that mimic bees and mimic wasps. This one's kind of okay, but it doesn't have to be that great. It just has to be good enough. And then others are really good. Another interesting thing, if you look at most flies have very short antennae, but this wasp has fairly large antennae. So what these flies do is they make long wasp-like antennae in different ways. This fly does it by, this is its head. It has a long pedicel, a big hole on the end of its head, and then its typically short antennae are way out here instead of being close to its head. So a lot of these flies that mimic wasps, they have extra long antennae that they build in different ways, and some of them have really short antennae, and what they do is they put their legs out like this, and they use their legs to pretend like they have long antennae. So they do it independently in different ways, but under the same selection pressure. This is again another one of our local flies that mimics yellow jackets. You catch these two in a net, and you're reaching in there to get them out, but what do? They buzz like a bee or a wasp. So they're also, even by the sound, and even if you're not paying attention, you kind of hesitate. Remember like snakes? You don't just grab snakes. Even your brain is telling you not to grab a hold of this, even though you know better, and that it's a fly. Here's one of the best ones from around here. It's called Spilomyia. Again, these are all flies who've done this thing independently. This is Chrysopodus. Great mimics of wasps and hornets. Okay, the other kind of mimicry that was learned from in butterflies was by Fritz Mueller. We talked about Muellerian mimicry. This is what he looked like. And this is one slide that is a good illustration of Muellerian mimicry in the kinds of insects that he studied. All of these at first glance have kind of the same general appearance. But if you look closely, they're all different. Okay, these are all different species. Some of these are many different families of butterflies and even moths that are unrelated things, and they got this way through selective pressures toward the same color patterns. Again, they're not perfect. They don't need to be good enough. Things that learn to leave red and yellow and black and orange and black things that have these stripe patterns on them that are butterfly-shaped things, they leave them all alone. So if among here, all the ones that taste bad, that are mimicking each other, that's Muellerian mimicry. And the very few signals that say the same thing are being reinforced by natural selection. In any cases where you might have something that's lying, and mimicking the rest of these things, that's Batesian mimicry, okay? So, if you get some time looking here, these things they're very different to your eyes when you look at them, and yet, on first glance and general appearance, they're very similar. They have these similar characteristics. All the examples that we talked about so far are all mimicry in animals, but mimicry also takes place in plants. So this is actually flowers of a milkweed plant, and I think this is Asclepias curassavica. Pay attention to what the colors look like. This is one that lives in Central America. Pay attention, milkweeds have weird flowers, but pay attention to the general shape and the color pattern. These things make nectar, and they make nectar to get insects close to the flowers, because the insects go close to the flowers to harvest the nectar, but in doing so, they bump up against the male parts of the flowers and get pollen on them. And then when they go to another flower, hopefully the same species, that pollen ends up on the stigma, the female part of another flower on another plant, or sometimes a different flower on the same plant. That's what the plant is all about. But nectar is expensive. It's a resource that they have to make. It's sugar. It takes photosynthetic resources to do that. But the reward is better than the cost. And so these milkweeds are making those things. But in the very same place, in amongst the milkweeds, are other plants, like this orchid, which is in, forgot the genus, it's dendro something. And it mimics the milkweed flowers, but it doesn't make any nectar. It's tricking the pollinators to come visit it and pick up some of its pollen. Now, pollen in orchids doesn't come in single pollen grains. It comes in packets called pollinia. And these flowers have lots of different ways of sticking a pollinia on something that visits an orchid flower. Their trick is, don't waste energy making your own nectar. They don't make nectar, but they look like flowers in the same place that do, and so unsuspecting insects visit these, pick up their pollinia, don't get any nectar. It's like, crap, I'll go on to something else. And they end up moving it around. So that's mimicry in plants. Here's another interesting example. We'll talk about some other examples of this, but this is another orchid. Again, it produces pollinia in here, and it doesn't make nectar as far as I know, but what it does is it has these big blotches on it here, and that's the trick it uses to get certain wasps or bees to come to it. And so this wasp here visits this flower because that orange spot is enough to think for this wasp, this male wasp, to think that's a female of the same species. So it goes in there to mate with that, and it's like, there's nothing here. But it gets close enough and spends enough time in the flower that this orchid sticks a pollinia, there it is right there, on the back of that wasp, and then the wasp flies away all frustrated and makes the mistake again, and then hopefully from the plant's perspective, sticks that pollinia on the stigma of that orchid, and it reproduces. This is a pretty crude example. There are lots of orchids. In fact, Charles Darwin wrote a whole book on the various contrivances by which orchids get pollinated, and there are orchid flowers that look just like insects. And lots of orchids actually can move. We'll talk about some that, when the insect grabs a hold of it, there's hinges on it. And it actually takes the pollinia or the whole insect and just goes, bam, it sticks the thing on it, and then lets it go, and it's all like, whoa. And it goes to another, lands on the flower of the same class, bam, and it just keeps doing that. And then some of those pollinia end up on the stigma parts of a female flower. So here's one that looks even better. So here's the wasp. This is actually the bee, and we'll use this example later. And then here's the flower. This is not the insect. These are parts of the flower that trick this insect into visiting that flower. It doesn't get anything out of it, but the flower does. It gets a chance to move on its pollen and reproduce and pass on the genes that code for this at the expense of genes that code for not looking like that so much. This is my last one for today. It's a little bit related to plants. I just found this one today. This is a little bug, a nymph, and it's pretending to be infected by a fungus. In different parts of the world, particularly tropical places, there are these fungi that attack insects, and the fungi are in this genus called cordyceps. And so like fungi, their main body are these things that are called hyphae, and they live inside the insect, and they eventually kill it, and then the fruiting body, like in a fungus, the fruiting body would be like a toadstool or a mushroom. So the fruiting body grows out of this dead insect, and then there's a big knob at the top, and that's where the spores are released, and then they get, some of them end up on other insects that they infect, and they reproduce that way. This insect is pretending to be infected, to be a dead insect that's infected by one of these fungi. What a great way to avoid being eaten. You're not just going to go after this thing that's infected with fungi. Is it really that late?
Yeah.
I hear squeaky tables. I think that's my last picture. Oh, it's probably too late to go on for another hour or two, right? Does anybody have any mimicry questions? Yeah, okay. Okay, here are the questions. Yeah. Yeah, I'm using the word pretending. That's probably an anthropomorphic. It's kind of a human kind of thing. It's really, it's doing that, but by doing that, it's deriving something. Those things tend to look like they're infected by the fungus, and they're really not. So they're lying. They're doing better at avoiding predation, and then